Hi, and welcome to this week's podcast, News from the Real World, where we talk about the top 10 articles that were generated this week. So we're going to start off. My name's Allie. I'm a second-year stage and production manager, and it's the end of the semester.
Hi, I'm Dave. I am a third-year TD and PTM focus.
And I'm Jessica. I'm a second-year costume design grad.
Yeah.
Shit.
Trying.
So we're going to start off with something local.
So the first article we're going to look at is Pennsylvania subsidized Creed 2 with $16 million in tax breaks, even though mostly takes place in California. So this is a lovely aspect where a lot of the local states will subsidize a lot of film coming out of LA to generally the idea is to use it to highlight a lot of the sort of state and like tourist attractions, and also being like Creed 2 is sort of the precursor or the later child of Rocky movie franchise, so trying to continue that franchise and its ties to Philadelphia. But one of the things that kind of happens in Creed 2, spoiler alert, is that Adonis Creed moves to LA from Philadelphia. So
Good effort.
Didn't really work.
Yeah.
Like, there are scenes that are in Philadelphia, but most of it takes place in LA and then Eastern Europe, and then like they fulfill the requirements to get their tax breaks because they like 60% of their production costs were based in Pennsylvania. So like there's sort of that, so that money is going to Pennsylvania, but like the question is the general gist of their explaining is they want it for the tourism sort of ad for themselves. And do you really get that benefit?
The tourism, and also like there is a quota of like how many people you have to employ, and then a lot of films go beyond that, and like that's the best part. Is like, hey, look at all of these jobs that we supplied, and like no, they're not permanent jobs, but that will lead to more places doing that, or more companies doing that same thing, where they'll come there and they'll want to get the tax breaks, certainly, but like they'll also employ locals and they'll contribute to local business and everything. And like, yeah, there's so much that goes into it that's like, really glad you checked off all the boxes to get your tax breaks. Like,
I just find it really funny because also it's taken a franchise that's tied very closely to Philadelphia and it's like, and no longer.
Yeah. I wonder what the motive was for that.
Well, so
I haven't seen the movie.
A couple of years ago, I don't know what the motive, like, story-wise was, but, like, a couple of years ago, they, or even maybe just last year, I don't know timelines.
It's okay.
Whatever. People in California were kind of really pissed off that, like, all of their filming was going out of state because the taxes were so high. Yeah. And so California tax law was actually looking at being amended, and I think it probably was, actually, so that they have bigger tax breaks in California so that they can continue to film there. So now it's kind of like, that might be part of it. I don't know.
And if I remember correctly, I believe there was an article last year regarding Philadelphia Film Union and just how it doesn't have its own, and it generally is it's subset of like the Queen's Film Union. So
it's not its own union, like in
there's
Philly.
A lot of weird aspects with that.
That is interesting.
I'm pretty sure that was last year. I don't know if anything of that changes. I'm pretty sure nothing has changed.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I find it funny, and like also, there is still a couple like movies that are filming in Philadelphia. Because, well, M. Night Shyamalan's still doing his new movie, and he only really films in the Philadelphia area. But, like, there's other movies I didn't realize were filmed in Pennsylvania that are just really bad. Including The Last Airbender from M. Night Shyamalan. That got a good $36 million worth of tax credits. And I did not know, first off, that was in Pennsylvania.
We had the newest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie filmed in Buffalo. It gave us a lot of really good money, but like, oof. Let's stick with Marshall, y'all. Like, that was a good movie filmed in Buffalo. Let's just stay there.
Then there's also the really wonderful film of After Earth.
What?
Will Smith trying to start up Jalen's career.
Yeah,
that got a good $20.4 million.
Wow.
Good.
Cool. But like, I just love the fact that like it ends with a really interesting thing, making fun of like sort of the fact of like the money being taken and like Adonis Creed leaving for LA. Just I found it really funny because the article is like Adonis Creed returning to LA. Most of the money from Pennsylvania's film tax credit program also ends up out of the state. I'm just like, ooh. That's just.
I'm depressed.
This is true. It's kind of funny though.
Oh God. Ooh.
But like, it's weird because like, yeah, you want people to be filming, and like, it's also a franchise that is very tied to the like. I'm from Philadelphia too, so like, it's annoyingly tied to Philadelphia, but also you would kind of be used to like want to see the general sort of cliche running up the like art museum steps and all those lovely cliches. But apparently, no.
I also wonder why they bring it back to LA. Again, I don't really know the storyline, but I feel like if you're gonna build into a sound studio to like film something that you could just like film in Philly at a cheaper place and get the tax breaks, like why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
So it's like kind of going back to like, what are the producers doing? What are the production companies doing? Like, what's the end goal?
The only thing I can think of from like a story choice is that Adonis is supposed to be from LA originally, and then like searched out Rocky, and then I guess comes Brains Rocky, and also Sylvester Stallone's apparently leaving Philadelphia, which Rocky leaves Philadelphia and goes to LA, which is sacrilege.
That's not okay.
But it does bring up the good question of like, should they have been allowed to get those tax breaks then? Do you know what I mean? Like if the majority of the filming is not actually there,
my thing is,
should there be something written in?
It's certain aspects like if they want it to be sort of providing jobs and they met their quota for jobs, I'm not angry at that. But if like they're being sold this idea of like, we're gonna film here, we want this tax break because, well, we're gonna film and make your state look really cool, come to it, and like give you new tourist sites.
Yeah.
If that's how they sold them, I'm not fine with that because they got gypped.
Yeah. We're gonna make your state look. Pennsylvania is like the Hufflepuff of states. Like,
whoa.
I'm a Hufflepuff. I love it. I just think it's kind of funny. I just get like.
We started a country.
Cool.
Thank you. We started a country.
Okay, so following the flow of money.
Oh yeah,
what do you got, Jess?
Talking about money, and I think Taylor. Where's Taylor Swift from? She's from
Pennsylvania.
She's from Pennsylvania originally. Yeah. And then her dad paid a lot of money to make people forget about that and pretend like she was from like Tennessee or something.
I want to
like
say she's originally from like the Reading area.
Yeah, something like that. So this article is actually really funny because my younger brother moved to Tennessee to Nashville to be a songwriter, and after about 2 years, he was like, absolutely not. The music industry is one of the most disgusting industries because, like, if you were a musician and then you signed with a recording studio or something like that, like, and they said like, here's a $3 million package. Even if you're like a new artist, you're still required to pay back that money, even if your tour and like your record sales, like it all failed. And so this article is really interesting because Taylor Swift signed a contract deal with Universal, and in it she's saying that all of the payouts that Universal's artist gets from Spotify will go directly to the artist versus back into the record company, which is saying that actually you owe me for all the things that we do for you, which we require as part of your contract that we also do for you. I'm not going to go into like the in-depth like situation of the record companies because you guys can read the article, but it's really disgusting how they take what an artist makes and they literally bleed them dry, and everything from all of the PR to cutting a record to doing all the tours, all the money that goes into that goes directly back into the label, and the artist like barely ever gets any of that money. So you see, and which I think is fascinating because like you see people, all the artists walking around, you're like, God, they're so wealthy. They're actually just like wearing clothes that like these companies give to them. They're staying in places that these places are asking them to stay in because they want that PR. They probably have like as much money maybe as like me, I guess, in some ways. Some artists definitely, like I think like Lady Gaga went bankrupt like 2 years ago, and everybody's like, how? She's like the highest selling record of that year, but she claimed bankruptcy against her record company because of all the tours. So it was like it's really fascinating. It's really dirty, and it goes. I think it really harkens to like other articles that we talked about earlier about like what does an artist own in the face of like commodity. And if you guys are really interested in that, there's a great book called The Gift, and it talks about art as a commodity and like how to sell it and how it's being sold and how like art is actually like a gift to society from you, the artist. So read that book, it's really good. But I have to give it to Taylor Swift. I don't personally, I don't know her, but I don't like her. And so...
Her cousin says she's not very nice. But.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right, internet. But...
I have no feelings.
Yeah. Do you really? You want to tell? You sure? You don't have any feelings about T Swift?
Yeah.
What? Shocking.
Sorry.
I don't personally like her, but I do think that she has done a world of good to some of the artists that are not getting, and like, it goes into like download and like LimeWire and all this, all this like downloadable stuff that you could have like LimeWire back in the day. But yeah, I think that she did good for artists out there, and I think that if you are a person in power, this is a way to to swing your power play and do something good instead of like, because they're saying like people who are really top selling artists like Lady Gaga or Taylor Swift or something like that, they can then negotiate their contract and they can make more money, but this kind of protects like the smaller artists that are out there.
Just starting it, yeah.
Yeah, which is disgusting. Like my brother played as a guitarist for this guy, and he was like, he's in so much debt. Like I will never do that. He's like, I'm just gonna get rich and then have my own like recording studio when I'm like 50. I'm like, that's also a way to go about it. Like,
yeah.
Like I remember like in undergrad reading a couple like case study in entertainment economics based on like the music industry and all of that, and how, and this, mind you, this is 6 years, and I think that case study was 6 years, like 12 years ago probably. And the vast majority of artists were getting very like 2 cents per album, if that, type
That's
of
crazy.
on the record sales, and the vast majority of them were only making most of their money by touring, because that there was less of a percentage of that taken.
But now there's the 360 clause that they added in, where the recording companies can get profits from all your ticket sales,
Which
your
is
t-shirts, all your merch, all that stuff. Yeah, they like, literally take everything.
Recording label getting profit from your tours.
Yeah, because they own you.
Like,
and that goes to something too. Like, if you want to be an artist, like really do the research about like what like your artistic rights. Like, don't just trust in like the anti something clause. Like, get a contract. Like, talk to a lawyer. But they were saying something like copyright, like they're like, oh, like the copyright lever in here is like the one that's like, oh, it's okay, that's like all you'll ever need is like the copyright, but like look for the antitrust laws. Yeah, really look for that. So yeah,
in our one class, Molly hits home like, and it's astonishing, I mean, like going a little bit away from this, but it's astonishing how a lot of people in theater don't read their contracts, and like they don't know what's in equity and they don't know what's in USA. And they're like, oh man, you really should.
Yeah.
There's a lot about like what you can own as a designer and what you
There's
can.
Also
like
just a simple aspect of terms and agreements.
Yeah.
Anyone ever actually read one of those?
Yeah.
All of those are technically contracts.
Yep.
This is true. Right of first refusal and like getting some sort of subsidies if like your show goes on tour or something like that. Like, yeah.
So much there.
Okay, we're going to transition back to you.
So, the next article I got is discussing, so it is Who Designs and Directs in LORT Theaters by Gender, Phase 4, Part 4. Essay by Portia McGovern.
Maybe we read her first phase? I don't know. I'm trying to remember what I'm thinking of. Anyway.
So, reading through this, there's a lot of graphs and a lot of statistics.
You weren't lying.
Most of them are, like, for the most part, it's fairly depressing until you get to any of the time series, because it generally breaks down, and you're seeing a lot of, basically the trend is it seems like it's 30% of women are directing, 30 to maybe getting a third of the share in directing overall, and then it's 2/3 male, and that's with both prolific, like actually of the 8 most prolific people directing, only 25% are women. So like, or it's just, but then you see regions, and it's all sort of floating in there. It's always floating around 35 to 30, and sometimes dropping below. But like, the one thing that was kind of nice, I guess, was if you look by the yearly, you do see an increase. So it's a
Yeah.
steady increase,
Okay. This
not
is good.
drastically, but you see a steady increase. You're like,
Well,
okay.
Although, yeah, sorry.
You
No,
see
I
a
was
steady
looking at
increase.
the wrong
Like,
way.
Graphs sometimes can be hard.
there's certain regions that break these trends, but in the actual market itself. So like that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Then like you go down through everything. So there's that. But what I then found was there's not much of a difference depending on even like who the director is and who the artistic director is on what the creatives or who the creative team is. That doesn't change really. So it seems like there's more of a correlation to probably the market itself, or people just not wanting to apply, or maybe like that would be my only guess, because like it doesn't seem like there's a lot of change in correlation, and it's weird. Like,
I also think the categories one is interesting, because like,
and then
in the LORT A plus, which like granted there's not that many left, but like those are tiny percentages.
Yeah.
Tiny.
Like 11.1%.
Yeah.
Like 8.3. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting that like in 2013 to 14 was their largest percentage, and then it just went down after that. Cuz it's like it sounds horrible, but and we've all worked at these theaters, like do you just have to wait for the old white men to die? Like
Probably. Which I know is a terrible thing to say, but
it's
I said it.
horrible, but
it's a sort of question of like how much has changed, like, because like as we saw in one graph, it's like, yeah, that's changing, but like
Yeah.
if you're not making that much money comparative,
well, and that's
I don't know, like I can't really speak upon that. But like then like other statistics that like if you go down towards where you're looking at correlation between directors and designers and that breakdown, you notice that like every single category other than costumes, it's male dominant, and not like the next closest one to not being
well, if they don't have
male
management
dominant
on here, but if they had management, it would be on. I mean, it's not designer, but yeah.
but like the next closest one to being not male dominant is if you have a female director then going into scenic, then it gets to 26%, which is
Yeah.
still healthily below
So
a
low.
third,
Yeah.
and like it's astounding.
Yeah. And I do think you're right. I mean, going off of the graphs further up, it's like, is it just a cultural thing that just needs to change on a nationwide scale?
Yeah, because
you
looking at this,
know?
like most of the tech, like, I mean, there's technical costume design as well, but not speaking towards that. But like, if you're looking at like scenic, lighting, sound, projection, and video, it's very like technical. I would call them mathematical based
Yeah.
things. So it's like if you want to find the crux of the issue, it's the fact that like women do tend to fall behind in like the sciences versus like the arts in a way. And so maybe like you're saying, oh, it's actually a larger issue. Like I'd love to see like a breakdown like this, to maybe breakdown of like other businesses and see like how women and men are represented in
yeah.
other businesses.
What I'd also be interested in, because you brought it up, is also like production management, stage
Yeah.
management, and technical direction.
Yeah.
Because like while this is all the creatives and that is useful, but like the day-to-day production team, people boots on the ground type of thing,
Yeah.
I'd be intrigued to see what that makeup is.
We did, there was a study that we looked at in class, in seminar, stage management seminar, where, yeah, we had a breakdown of who manages, and like based on age and based on gender and like it's, at least for stage management, it's primarily female based.
It's so fascinating.
which is
I'd like to
interesting.
understand the psychology behind it all as
Yeah.
well.
And then like you,
Sociology and stuff.
the other interesting thing is if you look at the design teams as a whole, and I feel like the one thing that skews this sort of stat is the fact that costumes is so predominantly female based in these other earlier statistics, that like when it does the mixed genders for entire design teams, it's like, well, 80% of them are mixed gender, because well, you're always going to generally have that costume designer, it seems like. But there is the 0.6 for all female. This is for the totality. There's an interesting one where it sort of sticks that way with the males, where it sticks to the standard totality, but when you get females, the percentage of all females design team goes up to 0.8, which is interesting. But then also the all-male one goes up. So, like, it's a weird correlation where it's like...
Yeah.
There's only 75 LORT theaters.
There's only 75.
Yeah, there's not that many.
In the country.
There's
the
really
country.
not that, yeah.
That's interesting, too.
So it's not a large pool we're looking at.
Yeah.
True.
So, like,
But
it's...
still, if you're looking at
Well,
a standard and, like, if you're in theater and you're looking at, like, this is what, you know,
This is the
professional
higher-
theater,
like,
yeah.
Even if you're
highest,
looking at, like, only 75, but it's over 5 years is what most of this data is collected over. So it's still it's not an overly biased sample size by making it too small of a sample size because they've done it over 5 years. So it
But how much
theoretically,
change happened over 5 years, too, is
but
the
you
question,
would still
too.
be looking at theoretically, because if you view it from like a data sampling type of thing, you're looking at 5 times 75. So you're looking at that many sample size, like samples. So you're not looking at like just 75 theaters. You're looking at that many because each year in that sort of that breakdown would be a new theater to an extent.
This would be cool to compare to, like, other...
I would
theaters
really,
and stuff like that, and, like,
I would be interested to also look at film
yeah.
and like just a breakdown of
Because I'm
industry.
also
in
assuming
general.
that, like, the directors will come in with, like, their team, and so, like, over the 5 years, how often does that team really change? So, like, you know what I mean? So, like, people tend to work with the people that they really like, so how much does that also skew this?
Right.
But highly recommend
information.
looking at it.
Yeah,
it
very,
is.
very
It is.
interesting.
There's a lot of information there and a lot of stats that is better seen visually versus
Yeah.
us just sort of
Certainly.
screaming numbers at you.
Good food
Yeah,
for
go
thought.
look at it.
Yeah.
It's on all around. So talking about, is it a generational thing? I don't know. That's what I got. This next article is titled "Snowflakes and Trigger Warnings." Shakespearean violence has always upset people.
It's a very strange title.
Is
For,
it?
I was very confused.
On theconversation.com. So it talks about how our generation is primarily seen as snowflakes.
Okay.
And that we are so easily offended that we need trigger warnings on everything. Oh no! Like, other generations would have been totally fine if dancers had touched themselves and then just crawled all over them. Sorry, what?
Well, don't we remember Janet Jackson? Apparently that had to go to Senate and Congress. Had
I remember
to look
that.
at Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction. It was
Justin
literally,
Timberlake.
literally in Congress. They were going over the sanctity of protecting the youth.
I feel like that snowflake phrase
But
is
that's-
incredibly offensive
Yes.
because, like, excuse me for calling you out on, like, some patriarchal bullshit.
Right.
Like, oh, you're sensitive. You can't handle somebody. Go, actually, I don't think that's right anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to question that.
And so this brings up how it's saying, actually, no, in terms of, like, trigger warnings in theater, let's look at Shakespeare. People have always had issues with Shakespeare. And they go over, the 1765 version of the plays of William Shakespeare, like, the writer who like put it together, not the writer, the editor who put it together was like, this is very disconcerting. And, like,
Shakespeare's so violent.
oh my god, it took out some stuff, and, like, it kept getting more and more censored, and so, like, oh my god, this one made me laugh out loud. 1681, King Lear was rewritten by dramatist Nahum Tate, in which, in King Lear, Cordelia and her father live happily ever after, because that's
Cool.
what Shakespeare wrote.
Yeah, that was the point of the play.
But it's interesting, and it talks about how, and I mean, they're right, like, Shakespeare is really difficult. Like, there's a reason that no one does Titus Andronicus. It's horrible.
So disturbing.
It's so disturbing.
It's so disturbing.
And, like, it's not that we're snowflakes and we're, like, this generation. It's that, like, you're watching a rape and someone cutting out her tongue and cutting off her hands on stage.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a lot.
not for nothing.
It's sort
But,
of like,
so, yeah,
well,
that's
if
what
you
it talks about.
took like Hotel Rwanda, it's considered a great movie and everything, but there's a reason why it's rated R.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's the thing. That is a type, in my opinion, of trigger warning.
Yeah.
That's like, hey,
You're
this
saying
is what you're
don't
gonna see.
put young children here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're talking about, like, Game of Thrones, which is, like, easily one of the most violent shows against women on television, and, like, the only time people ever have sex is, like, if they're raped or they're, like, having sex with their brother. And so, like,
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Game of Thrones.
Never
Like,
seen Game of Thrones.
what?
Anyway.
All right, we'll get onto that later. But yeah, I think like that is really interesting to take Shakespeare and put it into a thing and be like, yeah, people actually over this like all time have been like disturbed by it, and like people do some really fucked up things, and like, but that's art, and like we hold that mirror up to ourselves, and like me being offended by like graphic violence and calling that out, I don't think like also warrants like being called a snowflake in a way like as well. I think that that's the trigger warning thing. Like the trigger warning is very important because like, you know, again, maybe you shouldn't bring a 11-year-old to go see.
I just find it also
things,
like I find it funny when you look at just less than like in my lifetime there was also the aspect of the huge pushback between Mortal Kombat and the fake violence in Mortal Kombat and how that was too violent for people to see.
And stuff.
But like
Such a good game.
now when people are going back and be like, well, maybe like this much violence on stage, maybe we should think about this. Maybe we should think about like trying to sort of. But there was literally congressional movement to put labeling on Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
It is the reason why you have ratings on video games now.
Well, right. And
That,
it's
that
not,
and Grand Theft Auto too.
Yeah, like, so you just go into like, so it's all right back then to want to like be like, okay, maybe some violence isn't necessarily for everything. Maybe we should warn people before this. We just sort of give them this product. Why shouldn't the arts be the same way?
Well, and it's also like, it's not like we're saying don't make this art or don't show this art. It's just like, hey, what's up?
You know, like I'm a person that like sometimes I just like don't want to sit down and watch like a movie about, I don't know, like Congress or something like that. Like it's just like having a preferential choice. Like maybe somebody just doesn't want to watch a violent show. So like having that trigger warning is like, oh, actually I didn't know what the show was about. I'm glad I knew, so I don't pay for the tickets for a violent show.
Right.
Like some people just don't like to see that kind of theater, and like that's okay. That's not.
I think about it's also like some people could be fine with like certain rated R type of like movies. Where it's just like there's more emotional impact, but then those same people could like go see Saul, where there's this blood and gore
I was
and
just
everything.
thinking that. I was like, I love Game of Thrones violence, but I will not watch Saw.
But like, yeah, like that's just like what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Like, and you just go, that's just sort of unnecessary. But like, there's a difference. So it's like knowing what you're getting yourself into. Generally, when you're consuming a product, we do
like
it
a
with
good thing.
pretty much every other product. Why
it's like
not?
you know the ingredients to a drink, like
One would hope.
And you don't
One
know
would
how
hope.
it's
It's
going
true.
to affect people, you know, and going into
True.
how stuff affects people.
how things affect people. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next article is The Myth of the Tortured Artist, How New Zealand is Safeguarding Mental Health in the Arts. And this actually just harkens back to a lot of the articles that we've read this past semester about mental health in the arts. And what I really like about this one is that the concept that like in order to be an artist, you have to be a tortured artist. And like I remember being a kid and being like, I want to be Marilyn Monroe, but I can't because I like just don't have that tragedy. And that's what made her such a good artist, you know, like
my God.
that's a really fucked up way to think when
But
you're
I
like
see
14.
what you're
But
saying.
yeah, like I
Like-
think growing up you were told like that person's such a good artist because they were so
We
tortured.
do romanticize that sort of aspect.
And we still do.
We do.
Yeah, and so this article is saying that actually, like, let's not romanticize it because when somebody actually is depressed and they're an artist, like, it does hinder your artistic process. And so, and like, I thought was really interesting here that they did, and by they I mean, a study from Brandeis University in Massachusetts looked at the works of Van Gogh, Monet, and Picasso and found a correlation between events of emotional turmoil in their lives and the artist's less recognizable work. And then they concluded that their suffering actually didn't make their best work. The best work came when they were coming out of this depressive state and actually recognizing and sitting there and contemplating it, and then dealing with that and working through that and putting that on the page or becoming the artist or like working into the music and stuff. And so I think it also goes to they're speaking about shows and stuff having therapists on board to talk to the actors, the the people that are in the room in rehearsal process all the time. And I think that this is something that we should institute, especially when we're dealing with things that are very psychologically difficult and emotionally heavy. Like if there's rape on stage, like have a counselor there to talk to everybody, because 1 in 3 women have been raped and 1 in 6 men have been raped. And if there's 10 people in that room, chances are one person has like actually experienced it. And so having a therapist on board to help everybody understand that like this is a safe space and we're talking through these emotions that we're constantly digging up is, I think, very important. So I think that it's like, and this also talks about like how there's like the shame culture of like not talking about mental health, and I think that we still have a long way to go, but like we are so open now talking about it. Like I remember being younger and like people didn't really talk about depression, and it was so-and-so uncle, he's off at dealing with this, or he's like nobody ever mentioned it, and they always like brush it under the table. But now it's like, oh, actually, like let's have a conversation about it, let's talk about mental health in our family, like all the things. So I think that that's important.
Last week there was an article about how this ballet company is they started doing this, and like hopefully it's like catching on in the ballet world, and then hopefully theater world too, where it's like they have psychological therapists on hand, psychology therapists on hand, which is great because like they have, and they
highest level of eating disorders, and
oh my god,
yeah,
and they made the argument that like if you have, and that's like a very physical thing, like ballet, but it's also really hard mentally because of like, are you skinny enough? Are you tall? Like, oh my god, with the Rockettes, like you have to be within a certain height. Oh my god,
with which that you're trying to execute something, and the actual training that goes into ballet is very strict.
And so if you are gonna put like physical therapy and like physical therapists and doctors on call, why do you not also have a psychological therapist?
I think there's also another level, just even behind the tortured artist, like taking sort of that out of it. In the arts entertainment world, the vast majority of us will never make great money. The vast majority of us will work way too many hours with way too little recognition for what we do. And that can, in my opinion, wear emotionally on someone.
Oh, yeah, that alone.
And that alone, even taken away, no matter, like, even if you're doing the happiest-go-lucky play over and over and over, like,
it's still weird.
But if you can't pay your bills and you're worried about that, like, that is so stressful.
You could be doing Seussical for today until the world ends. That might drive you nuts for another aspect.
Oh, God!
That might drive you nuts for another aspect, but it's a happy play. But, like, if you're, like you said, not paying the bills, you're spending too much time at work and you can't spend time with family or friends. If you can't, like, it just, all of that stuff on the side just never works out because work is tearing you apart. That can do an emotional number on you. And that's without dealing with other strains.
Right.
It's very
important. I like the idea of
Yeah.
working on mental health in the workplace, because also a lot of other organizations, when they're large organizations and other industries, have HR departments.
Yeah.
They're kind of,
which is like part of
you have to get really big for that to sort of really start to be a thing.
It's like a corporatization of it, but I think that as things get bigger and you pull HR in and you pull the therapists and everybody, like, it actually is for the benefit of everyone. You know, like, you get workplace protection, and while corporation is not a great word, you know, people have lack of trust in corporations, but I think that corporatizing certain elements of it helps the individual really in a really positive light.
And like, you're going to make better art.
You are going to make better art, I think, if you're reflecting on things
or you're just going to be protecting your
employee.
Happier. And if your employee is protected, they're generally going to be able to produce more things for you.
It really works in your benefit to like,
or want to, like, they're going to want to stay. They're going to want to continue producing. It generally in the long run, because even if you just view it from, you can get lucky on producing just one piece of art, and like 1 out of 1 million pieces of art is this great, like, Mona Lisa type of painting. If 1 in a million's that, if you just keep producing over and over and over again, and people keep willing to be able to produce, you're going to eventually hit that masterpiece. Even if you just took that simple approach at it.
Yeah.
But like, if people are more satisfied and more willing to work and feel better, generally, I would say the product's going to be better.
Yeah. So get therapists.
Do it. Great. Yeah. And make it part of the mainstream.
So speaking of therapy and self-love.
So, how to emotionally detach from criticism.
Yay.
So, I feel antagonized.
As we enter into crits, too.
I feel antagonized by myself in giving this article to me. Because I'm very bad at this. So, here we go. This is Life Hacker by Beth Skwarecki. Skwarecki?
Yeah. That sounds right.
Sorry.
Sorry, Internet.
Sorry. how to.
I'm constantly apologizing to the internet at large.
So I actually thought that this was super helpful. I mean, like, even if it wasn't helpful, it was just helpful to hear it written or out there in the ether or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes through, like, how to do this, right? So accept that criticism is going to happen. Hopefully it's positive, hopefully it's constructive, but, like, either way it's going to happen. So what do you do with it when that happens? Pay attention to who it is. If it's your boss or someone, like, who actually matters, or, like, a friend, or, you know, someone who has a good opinion that you trust, yeah, maybe listen to it, find out what they're trying to get at. And if it's someone like that, hopefully it's not going to be harsh. You know what I mean?
Hopefully
like,
it will come constructively and not just like, hey, you suck, and then you walk away and you're like, where'd that come from?
I thought I liked you.
Yeah, exactly.
But if it's someone...
that's so really useful.
Yeah, you're like, thanks
Thank
for that.
you.
I will work on that.
Cool.
Mull it over.
But if it's just Joe Schmo, maybe don't pay attention. Or
You mean if it's like an Instagram follower that just trolls you, don't pay attention to that?
Listen, online arguments are the best ones to have. Separate facts from interpretation.
On a no comment.
I liked this one because it was like, are you actually messing everything up and the world is burning and we're all gonna die, or like,
Are you
is
in
that
your own
one
room?
person's perception of a really shitty day that they had?
Interesting.
Sorry. Know that it says more about them than it says about you. If they're lashing out and it's really harsh or whatever, it's probably that they have something that they're going through. And maybe you shouldn't. You don't necessarily have to reach back out to them to be like, hey, are you okay?
Sure.
But, like, you don't have to take what they're saying either.
Yeah.
And the last one is find the grain of truth. So this one is hard for me because I do not do well at detaching emotionally from criticism. Because I just take it all to heart. And I'm like, oh my God, I did such a bad job.
Never.
But,
Never.
I almost tried to burn, I didn't try and burn a theater down. I almost burned down a theater one time.
I'll try it.
Wait, what?
Anyway,
Not
we're
here.
going to keep going. Find the grain
Not
of
here at
truth.
CMU.
Not here. Not even this summer.
So proud.
But, no, like, if there is especially constructive criticism, but even maybe if it's not, and maybe especially if it's not, if it's really hard criticism to hear, you can be angry about it and you can be frustrated, but then at the end of the day, maybe try and reflect back on it and see if there was anything useful in it. And if there was, great, and then you can work on that in a constructive way. You don't have to tell that person. But if there wasn't...
And in this sort of like aspect, I also find it's useful to like talk through with someone else sort of like thing, because often for me, I am relatively emotionally attached, but also if I get annoyed
You are
with
attached
someone,
or detached?
Detached.
Detached, okay.
If I get annoyed with a situation, I will fester with that. And if I am able to talk it through and sort of like hear someone else like, maybe they're just sort of saying this, I'm like, oh, I guess that probably seems more reasonable.
Right.
Less rage.
Yeah.
So it's sort of that aspect, and also like especially when it comes to non-constructive criticism, there's a certain aspect like you're just beating yourself up, and you're doing, especially if you're just like, well, screw that person, they just hate me. Well, maybe they do, and maybe all you're doing is helping them harm you. It doesn't help you. Doesn't like they didn't want to help you. You're not helping you. Like.
We're making the situation worse.
Yeah.
I always try to take criticism with a pinch of salt, because if it is like direct criticism and it's not constructive, like truth be told, I probably won't listen to it, because I feel like if you're only going to critique me and not give me constructive criticism, then what you have to say is actually pretty offensive, and I don't need to like I'm detached as well. Like I have this like toughen up mentality of like, okay, that's fine. Like you can have your opinion, that's okay. I don't need to please everybody, but when it's constructive criticism, sometimes that I feel like always lands better, because you're giving somebody the critique, but you're also saying, here's other ways to get better at it, because it also shows that you care. And so like I think at the end of the day, like just remember that people critique because they care sometimes, and then some people critique because they feel bad about something going on in their life, and like you said, you can make a choice to reach out, hey, that was pretty harsh, are you doing okay? Or like, hey, that was pretty harsh and I didn't appreciate that. Right. And then, walk away from it. Yeah.
Now I have a side thought. I wonder what the critiques on this will be.
Oh, I wish. Come on, internet, give us comments. No,
Come back
deep
to-
fears of getting like Facebook stalked would be like, you're such
Oh
an
my
idiot.
god.
You.
But like that's fine, guys. Facts are in the articles. This is just emotional response.
So I don't even know how to tie this one in, other than like
Critique this.
Critique
I'm.
Wax
Oh my
sleep?
god. Oh yes. Yes. Okay. Heavy
Remember.
critique on this.
Useful critique.
Useful critique. It's coming from me. Fast Company, whoever wrote this. Kaylee Moore.
Really?
I'm just okay. Listen, it's okay, but hear me out. Why you're not prioritizing sleep even when it's hurting your productivity? And it's an article about how we don't prioritize sleep, and sometimes that's even like a measure of like how much we care, which is like also a thing in grad school and like in school in general. It's like, oh yeah, well I only got 3 hours of sleep last night.
And I think that is super detrimental and bullshit
So
because
bad.
you can care a lot and still also care about getting 8 hours of sleep.
Right,
care
and
a
still
lot
care about
about
yourself.
Yeah, you
And,
care about
like-
yourself and your work.
Yeah.
The no sleep culture is not healthy.
I'm here for the long time,
Yeah.
not just
It's a marathon, not a race.
Right. So, however, so I understand. I get it. She, and there are some staggering statistics. Sleep deprivation causes more than $400 billion in financial losses each year.
What?
And results in 1.23 million days of work lost.
Yeah, because what you're thinking about is like injuries that happen on work sites,
True.
people messing up different things like
Having to
crashing like a forklift, or
Yeah.
like then that destroys a whole bunch of product, or making
Yeah.
just a mistake on an assembly line,
Right. Or just not being as productive.
Sending a
because
bad email.
Yeah.
or just, or God forbid, dying
Knock
because
on wood.
they weren't sleeping and then they were sleep deprived and missed a safety protocol and
This is
that.
true.
I see.
Yeah.
So she does have good things to say. Like it's reasonable, and she says that there's solutions to all of the excuses that we all come up with. So like the excuse of I stay up late watching something, looking at my phone. Yeah, this
Yeah,
is super
totally.
bad.
That's bad. Yeah.
Super bad. I do it too. But
do it
her
too often.
solution
What was just
is to take the last hour, swap that last hour on your laptop for reading, stretching, or meditation. Okay, listen. If I could do that, I would.
Yeah.
But I'm doing homework until 2 a.m. because I have that much homework.
Yeah.
And then I pass out.
Yeah.
My other question is, like, reading I can kind of understand. So like you can read and then like as soon as you get
Yeah.
tired, you just sort of like throw the book
Yeah.
or like throw whatever you're reading over to the side. Like okay, now it's sleep time.
Yeah.
Stretching?
Well,
It's like nighttime
I'm gonna
yoga. It's
Right, like,
nighttime
you
Wait,
yoga.
can,
wait,
like,
wait.
compressed
I'm not gonna
it
go
all day.
out of my bed, go stretch somewhere else, and then be like, well, now I'm tired.
you
Now
can
I'm
still do
glad
that.
I'm happy I stretched.
I can like see
Time
you
to
just
walk
like on your
back to
phone, and
bed.
just like time to stretch my bed, and then we're out. But I think the point here is just like instead of me sitting on Instagram for 45 minutes before I fall asleep, I could just probably stare at the wall instead. And,
Well, like-
talk
Because that's
myself out that
healthy.
way,
Yes.
you know?
No, and I understand that.
But
That
also,
I
she's also
understand.
banking on my self-control, which is like at a minimum when it comes to like Instagram.
And also, like, so she goes through other things, and it's just like I'm always too awake to fall asleep. Okay, establish a sleep routine to stick to it.
Don't
right.
drink so much caffeine at 3 p.m. I get
But
it.
like,
Fine.
if I could have a consistent sleep schedule, don't you think I would?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
there's a
and
certain-
we're in theater, and sometimes it's just what comes with it.
Sometimes you can do it. Sometimes you can't. Remember, stretch.
And then like, remember stretch.
Sleep stretching.
We'll do nighttime yoga after this to relax.
Other things I do.
But what
really,
if I fall asleep?
Well,
Goals.
that's awesome. Other things I think she does not take. I think this is very geared towards people who can and are able to do this in their lives. So like,
Sure.
my back neck problems wake me up at night. Invest in a good quality mattress and pillows.
Cool.
Yes.
Sure.
I have the money to just buy a whole new mattress and pillows. Yes, let me go do that. Anyway, so critique. I have it on this article, but sleep is a thing you should get.
Yeah. I think like there's two things I try to do is like definitely not have caffeine after 3 p.m. because as
Yeah.
a human being, caffeine really does affect me. And then the phone thing I get because that is my vice. But sometimes I just want to fall asleep to Parks and Recreation. Like, so sue me. You know, like,
There's-
am I going to feel guilty about it the next day? Probably. But am I going to get over it? Yes.
I do
Like,
love
it's
also
fine.
like the reading and falling asleep type of thing. I've done that plenty of times.
Yeah.
Finding
Yeah.
this good old boring book and
Yeah.
just
So good, though.
send
You're like, you know,
yourself
when the
off.
rain's coming down and you're in your log cabin and, like, you know, you're living
Yes,
that
that
perfect
log
life.
cabin I have,
Yeah, the
just
log
on the
cabin's
side.
real important to this.
Just have that on the side.
So you put your best mattress and pillows in your log cabin.
Exactly.
And you get
I
12 hours of
stretch
sleep
before
at
I
night.
get
Stretch before you
in
get
the log
in
cabin.
the
I
lo-
stretch when I
yes.
get in the log cabin. I stretch before I go to bed.
Yes.
So,
But in general, definitely just take better care of yourself.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So once you get out of your log cabin and you want to go get something to eat, there's an interesting next article, which is How Restaurants Got So Loud by Kate Wagner.
What?
Yes. It's actually
It's actually
it seems kind of
pretty
ridiculous.
Yeah.
I love it.
But it does make sense because there is like the more you realize it, like I've gone out like to eat very sparingly, mostly when family's in town type of thing. And you realize like a lot of places that seem really trendy or whatnot, or like trying to be trendier, also seem really uncomfortably like louder than you would
So
feel
loud.
want.
Yeah.
And it like there's an interesting aspects where they're going. It's mostly describing the architecture and what we consider trendy, and more trendy restaurants have more modern aesthetics.
Interesting.
And most of those modern aesthetics bounce sound instead of eat them.
Yeah.
Oh.
So like hard surfaces, all these hardwood surfaces.
So it wasn't just
like,
the happy hour happening.
Well, it's also just shoving that many people in a room.
That's
I
true
guess.
too.
But like most of the
Constructed.
architects, like it just goes through, and it goes through like multiple different years of like how different movements in architecture and the design aspects of restaurants have slowly gotten away from like the old pub with like the tapestries and like
Love
the
it.
all of like that.
I live for that.
Oh, I would live for pub.
Right.
But like
I
it's
love a
how we're
pub.
moving away, how we're like moving away from like a lot of those like lower ceilings because everything wants to be higher ceilings. We're moving away from
Like
acoustics,
the
like
exposed brick,
Yeah.
the industrial
Yeah.
space.
everyone
all
wants
that.
to look like this, more trendy, just because people don't care, I guess, about the sound. And there's an interesting thing where they were saying like the average, like they're in a coffee shop, and it was 73 decibels. And 85 is when it starts hurting your ears.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's 73 decibels in a coffee shop. What was it? For aspects, 70 decibels includes freeway noise, an alarm clock, and a sewing machine.
It's
Considering I spend a lot of time around a sewing machine, I should probably be protecting my ears better.
80
Damn.
decibels was in a dimly lit wine bar at dinner time. And speaking towards sort of louder places, 86 decibels at a high-end food court during brunch.
Well, that's no surprise. Come on,
Oh,
brunch.
Oh, it gets even more fun. 90 decibels at a brew pub in a rehabbed fire station during Friday happy hour.
That sounds awesome, though.
that makes sense.
But that makes sense,
though.
though.
But like
Because
your
it
first
can't-
aspect of like that sounds awesome because it's a refurb, like because
Yeah.
it's trendy.
'Cause I'm like,
But
oh my God,
then
this is
therefore
awesome.
you're gonna throw more
Yeah.
people in there.
It's
just-
well, you're gonna throw more people in there, and like for that, it makes sense because like you're not gonna have a fire station that's like flammable, but flammable materials are normally more sound absorbing, and so like you know what I mean, like that.
It's
If
just,
it's
But it's
made out
probably
of
that
if it's
higher
made out of
architecture,
wood,
too.
there's
and
also
it's the higher
like
architecture. And
there's this
like,
aspect of like they were saying in the 70s and the 60s we're getting towards using a lot of the drop ceilings and the acoustic tiles, and now that's just considered really just tacky looking.
Because it is.
Well, okay, it could be.
Oh man, we're getting the time clock.
yes, we have been.
Well, I will say this. Do you think it'd be weird if I showed at a happy hour with like earplugs? Because I do.
I wouldn't.
do it
Should I do that? I'll do that maybe tonight.
So be
We'll
it.
test it out.
Thursday.
I'll be like,
Test the
what?
Test
Screaming.
the theory.
I'll test the theory.
But yeah, that's how restaurants got so loud.
That's
so maybe you need to go back to your
fascinating.
log cabin and sleep.
Oh,
Where silence is golden.
But that's a lot of hardwoods. Make sure you put tapestries.
Well, obviously. I mean, come on. How else do you decorate your log cabin?
Sorry.
but make sure they're restful enough that you can like fall asleep and be very zen.
True. They can't be any violent tapestry.
No.
No,
For us
no
snowflakes.
lost unicorns. Okay, so it's a little art history nerd for you. Okay, I think the best article
Yes.
on the top 10.
I actually commented on
Did you comment on this one? What did you comment? What did you say?
I was intrigued that it was a bigger thing than I thought it was.
Yeah. So I used to play. Okay, it's about retractable blades, and like, definitely used to chase my brothers around the house and stab each other with these around Halloween or like anytime we could get our hands on them. So the retractable blade, and like, cause it's YouTube, and for those of you listening, when you would stab somebody, the blade would disappear, and so it would look like you would stab somebody and go each time.
The Halloween scream knife.
It's the Halloween scream knife, yeah. And so apparently these were used in theater as well as for props in like fight choreography, and then you just like low-key stab someone. But there is no way to fabricate a retractable dagger that does not bind, and so some of these get stuck, and then you're actually stabbing someone. And this article is interesting because they have 3 cases that they cite. So in 1990, somebody was stabbed while playing Lady
Macbeth.
No.
Was it Macduff?
Get out of the room and walk around and come back in. Lady Macduff, yeah. But she fortunately recovered. And then in 1998, in a production of but somebody got stabbed with a knife that failed to retract. And it was just like a rehearsal, and then they had to go to the hospital, and then they had to be replaced. And then the other one is Michael McElhatton, who was in Game of Thrones as the Roose Bolton. He got stabbed, and it was like an inch away from his heart. And I mean, that's crazy. He almost died.
The thing is, like, it makes sense on why they bind.
Yeah.
Because, like, just from, like, if you think about, like, drawers. If you're trying to push in your drawer and you hit it from the wrong angle, it's gonna bind.
And then you're actually stabbing somebody with like a plastic knife.
Your drawer is not a pointy object.
Or metal.
Or like
metal.
Metal, plastic. Like, it makes sense when you actually think about it. But like, the reason why I ended up commenting on this is like, I never really even like put 2 and 2 together on that aspect. I just thought like people would be like forgetful and be like, well, that's the retracted knife, that's the real one. Whoopsies, we flipped them.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of what my brain always went to, why we never really used them.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because it was like safe to like get them confused with a real knife. Yeah. I know my mom would always be like, stop it, that's so dangerous. And I'm like, but you bought it for us anyways, let's chase each other around.
So like that made sense. And like then I got like just curious, like, if there would be ways to physically do it, and
I also like don't know why, like, as a fight choreographer you'd be like, this retractable knife is like the way to go, instead of like choreographing something that like was an alternate to it. But they're saying that the University of Michigan recently banned the use of them in their performances after a local OSHA representative researched their inherent danger. And so it just like encourages us all to go through stock and destroy all the retractable knives, which I think sounds like an awesome AI project. Just saying. I would happily dig through bins to find retractable knives to destroy them.
I don't think we even have any. No.
You don't think we have any? I'm going to bet you we probably have like a few that we should definitely take care of.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that warehouse?
I ain't doing it.
You're not. You don't want the AI for it? Well, that's.
I try to spend less time in that warehouse.
Well, that's fair.
I live there.
In terms of like destroying, or maybe opposite of destroying things that we already I don't know how to do the segue to this one, but like,
that was a nice article. Here's another article.
Ever.
Things. We're talking about things. More things. Here are things.
Tried to make retractable blades a thing of the past, and museums.
Dun, 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 dun. We're getting good.
Museums aim to be a model for making collections available via 3D printing.
I'm confused. What?
On WVXU by Ann Thompson. So
this is really cool.
It is very cool, but I have fears.
Why?
Hold on, I will say it. So this is about how the Benjamin Harrison presidential site in Indianapolis was one of the first museums to offer free 3D printing as part of its collection. So that it's the idea is that, and hopefully this will catch on, they hope, the idea is to make art more accessible to their patrons. And so if you can interact with the art in a very real 3D way, it closes the gap between, an artist who's like however many years old and
Yeah.
like made this thing and you're like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Is
But
it like, is the difference between just like viewing it and like being able to like pick it up and hold
Yes.
it and like touch it?
yeah, so like they're like printed via 3D printer and like you can actually interact with them. They have like, they made like blocks that you put the
Like
person
kids
in.
can, so they're making toys.
Well, and that's my thing. Like, is this just a gimmick?
What's
And
your thought?
My
It's
other
like-
thought, well, my fear, honestly, and this is my fear, is this gonna come to, like, replace the art where it's like, well, you know what,
But
this isn't, like, in such great shape anymore, like, we have to, like, take this off for a little bit, we're gonna put this in and no one's gonna notice. And to be honest, I think part of the beauty of art is that it's not gonna last forever.
So you're thinking of it just in the art aspect. There's other really fascinating things. And I remember like first hearing something along this lines. Actually, I just looked it up. So Radiolab, I remember listening to an article about they have, I'm going to butcher this. They have one of the oldest skulls known to be one of the first human skulls known. And this whole
That's cool.
aspect of, there was this whole trying to figure out what killed it. And the people, the scientists around that decided they wanted to 3D print the skull and be able to spread it because like it's only one skull.
Yeah.
So you can't really
Can't handle it that much.
can't handle it that much. You can't
Can't
send
decide.
it everywhere.
No!
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the end of this whole like thing, they go, well, we got access to that 3D model. Here's what you can do. Go to our website and you can 3D like they
Yeah.
put it. It's free. You can
Yeah.
find it on Thingiverse. Like, and you're just like, and also done it. It's really cool.
Did you really?
Yeah, it's really cool. And like,
Yeah.
it's for me, it's such a cool concept because like all that stuff where you have it explained to you,
Mm-hmm.
and you let's say you can't actually go and travel to a place, or you want to have memorabilia of certain art that is important to you. Being able to print it in scale, or being able to print a skull that is
Yeah.
interesting to study, or to be able to do any of those historic things in model form, I think's fascinating to the extreme.
I think it's really cool. It opens doors to like people who are visually handicapped. So if they could like go ahead and touch the things, like at the Warhol Museum, like you can touch the relief of certain artworks, which I think is really great because it does open the world up to a lot of things. And listening to this, I'm like, well, what's the difference between just like 3D printing it and like making a copy of it? But I guess like the 3D printing to scale is really cool. So you'd be able to see it if you do print it out to scale and like get like a realistic thing. Be able to print it out at home, you know, if you have a 3D printer at home.
And they're getting more affordable.
They are. 3D printing is, I think, fascinating as just a
Oh,
general
yeah.
thing. But I guess my
agree.
question, besides it being to scale, is like, what's the difference between like this and then like a statue I could just buy it at the museum?
Right,
art
there
store?
are replicas
There's
of
already
these
replicas
all
of
of the
things
time.
all the time, yeah.
There-
And I agree that 3D printing is very useful. My brother-in-law just finished a PhD, and like the number of saber-tooth teeth that he has printed because his dissertation was on big cats.
Okay.
I need to read that. That's so cool.
Is like they're all over the house. Like
That's
his 5-year-old
fun.
like has them like
That's
on her bedstand.
great.
Like
I may or may not have also 3D printed like most of my Christmas gifts last year.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I also think it's going to be interesting, and I think this was part of an article before. It's going to bring into question like, does copyright apply to 3D printing?
Fascinating
And that
concept.
that I can understand, and that I'll respect.
Interesting.
But like the certain aspect of like whether or not this is cool and whether or not like I think it's immensely fascinating, and one of the things in like through like the modeling and everything that they eventually discovered that they noticed because people were looking at it was they noticed like because the whole theory was that big cats killed the original
Yeah, how'd
this
he die?
species. It was actually a bird. They theorized very giant eagles.
Shut up.
I am
'Cause-
validated. Go ahead.
Wait,
Because
what?
they
'Cause I hate
thought,
birds.
because they were theorizing that because like cats like the crushed skulls and part of the skull was crushed, but they were like, oh, we noticed that there's peck marks around the eyes.
Shut up.
And they like so
Yes,
like
what
you're
the
looking
heck?
at it and you're just like these are just studies that are like happening like and like when multiple people are able to handle something, it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you like there's certain things where like it's a lot less intrusive to do a 3D rendering of scanning, like laser scan,
Yeah.
than it is to do a mold.
Well, then
or
my
something.
question there would be like,
Yeah,
would the
I
laser
agree.
scanning for the 3D printing on certain art pieces actually risk
Harm it.
damaging it?
That
Because
would-
I think with like fossils and stuff would be really cool, but if you're 3D scanning like some like clothing fabric, like stuff like that, a
could
painting,
actually harm
it could actually harm it from.
Yeah.
I
And
would
that's-
just wonder what
that would
be.
be
or-
the interesting thing. But like, there's a lot of place for this. I would
Yeah.
love it for like basically every natural art museum
That would be
or
so
natural
cool.
history museum.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree,
Just-
especially in the hands-on
'Cause
exhibit.
I would totally
part.
take home
Skeletons,
as, like,
all of
a-
these different things. Because like,
I have a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton. That'd be
Yeah.
cool.
That'd be
like
cool.
just like low key in the house. You're like, it's 3D printed. It's really cool. Don't mind this. Let's go read in the parlor of this cabin.
I may, or, I may or may not be 3D printing my dad a Lombardi trophy from this set.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so
Nice.
sweet.
So,
I love that. So
these-
yeah,
Yeah, these were
But-
10 articles.
comment
This
on the
week.
comments section. There's a comment section.
Don't comment upon the comments.
Yeah.
But comment in the comments.
in the comments section.
Only constructive critique.
Like I said, the best is online arguments. So go for it.
Unless you do non-constructive critiques about non-constructive critiques. That'll be just a lovely loop.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
we will
you.
see you not next week. So have a
Oh
good
my
holiday.
goodness! Have a great holiday.
Bye,
Have fun.
everybody.
Get sleep in your log cabin.
Yes.
With
sleep.
your brand new
Don't forget to
mattress.
stretch before you go
Stretch.
to bed.